Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
You know, it's not a theory. They did fake the moon landing. That's a fact, whether people realize it or not. My opinion is really the opinion of the experts. I was more than a supporter with my father in the Air Force.
What changed? Was there a moment?
Yeah. So the number one proof that we have is simply deductive reasoning, because today, with 54-year better rocket designs and computer designs, the farthest that NASA can send a rocket with an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. That's why they're sending mannequins to orbit the moon that can't even land because they would die from the radiation.
All right, people. Two things are official. One, I think I do have a little cold, or maybe it's allergies. It could be seasonal allergies. So I apologize for sounding a little off. Although I bet you there's actually one person I know who's going to text me tomorrow and be like, "You sounded normal to me," because they think I'm nasally. They think I speak nasally. I kind of do, actually. It's actually because I have a ridiculous deviated septum. I genuinely do. If any of you, next time any of you see me in real life, let me know and I will take your index finger and I will stick it up both of my nostrils respectively, and you will notice that my septum is pushed completely to my right nostril, and the left nostril, like you could drive a car through that thing. Yeah. Oh my God. I think I'm on a little bit too much antihistamines right now. Why did I share all that? All right. So it's official. I either have a slight cold or potentially allergies. Second, I am interviewing Bart Sibrel, and this guy is the guy probably most well known as the guy that says the moon landing was fake. And I'm not going to lie, I've always thought the moon landing was fake. And I'm not going to ruin it too much, but I am going to play a few more clips before the interview. I'm interviewing him next Tuesday. And gosh, I'm really going to try to even get it released immediately. But I've always thought it was fake, mainly because every other piece of technology and every other technological improvement, think about televisions, cell phones, automobiles, the internet, now AI, all of this stuff has really progressed by a factor of 1,000 when you compare it to 1969. Think about that. Think about 1969 versus today. But the moon landing and going to the moon is the one thing we've never been able to replicate. And then there's so many, like, just crazy things about it. Like they said they destroyed the technology, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm really excited to talk to Bart, and he's been on a ton of podcasts, and it's kind of cool that I'm able to get him. I mean, he's been on Joe Rogan. That was April of 2024. He went on Candace Owens again, December 2024. He's been on InfoWars with Alex Jones. That's a big one. He went on Patrick Bet David, the PBD podcast in 2023. That's a big one. So more than anything, honestly, it's kind of cool. I'm getting these guests. I mean, it is definitely, I don't know. It's cool for me. I've got to keep it going though. I've got to keep leveling up my guests until I start to land the A-list guys, because I think that's when things will really take off. Anyway, thought I'd share that. Okay, I want to talk about a couple things today. I posted kind of a carousel on these two guys on Instagram, and it got a lot of reaction. And more importantly, like, I definitely think there is something bigger involved with this. And quite frankly, potentially all the way to the present day. And what I'm talking about is John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. And so, you know, I've talked before, I think one of the things this Gaza situation has done is really open up the floodgates to everything and open up people going back and looking at 9/11, looking at quite frankly, everything, all the way back to like the Titanic and it sinking. But one of the things that, there's just a ton of good investigative journalism going on regards is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And, so long ago, I think I did a whole episode on it. Actually, that's probably funny. I'll have to go back and listen to that episode. It was probably so basic versus where I am today, because I think that was one of the maybe first 25 or 30 DSD episodes. But here's the thing. I have really noticed basically what Kennedy was doing. There were 4 or 5 major themes that Kennedy was doing. He gets killed. LBJ comes in and becomes president, and literally, like within days, reverses every single one of those things. So let me start off by sharing that. And my title slide for JFK is Who Really Killed JFK? And my title slide for LBJ was Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, the man who set America on the wrong path. And I really do believe that. So let me play this out with you. So the first thing, and really, gosh, potentially the most important, although this is now debatable, was that John F. Kennedy was adamant about withdrawal from Vietnam. It was probably one of the 4 or 5 most important things, if not the biggest thing he was all about, okay? Adamant about the withdrawal from Vietnam, and that's what he wanted to do, okay? He's killed. LBJ gets sworn in, and what does he do? LBJ literally reverses JFK's withdrawal from Vietnam and absolutely doubles down. I mean, so much so that he escalated Vietnam to a full-scale war. 58,000 Americans ended up being killed during that process, during that war, and millions of Vietnamese are killed, okay? So that's number one. Vietnam, JFK planned a full withdrawal, and to end U.S. involvement, LBJ comes in, like absolutely like drops the hammer and triples down, okay? The second big one, oh, and by the way, there was something in 1965 called the Gulf of Tonkin, okay? You might have heard this, but this falls into that false flag, which I know I never ended up doing that episode. I promise I will. And so actually, I won't cover the Gulf of Tonkin too much today. I promise I will do that false flag episode where I talk about all of them collectively. But basically, what it was LBJ, they kind of staged an attack on supposed U.S. ships, but it turns out it wasn't the case, and they used that to like double down in Vietnam. All right, so the second big one was in regards to the CIA. So JFK famously stated after the Bay of Pigs disaster in 1961, and for those that don't remember what the Bay of Pigs disaster in 1961 was, that was the failed U.S.-backed military invasion of Cuba where they wanted to take out Fidel Castro, and that obviously did not happen. And it was like a huge embarrassment for the Kennedy administration and a big propaganda victory for Castro. JFK publicly accepted responsibility, but I think that was where he really got pissed off at the CIA for putting him in that position. And so there's a famous quote, and I remember RFK Jr. said this on Joe Rogan or something, where he basically said, my uncle wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. You've probably heard that quote.
My uncle, John Kennedy, he realized early on that the purpose of the CIA and the intelligence apparatus was to create a constant pipeline of new wars. Eisenhower, who was the outgoing president, gave what is probably the most important speech in American history, which was, where he warned against the military-industrial complex. I was at my uncle's inauguration. I was in Washington that day, a 6-year-old boy. And 2 months later, the military and intelligence came to him and said, we got to invade Cuba. And he was like, I'm not going to Cuba, and I'm not going to let the military. And they said, well, we got all these Cubans trained, and they're going to go attack Castro. And he said, well, the U.S. government can't be doing that. I don't like what Castro's doing down there, but it's not the United States' job to dictate what kind of governments other countries have. And they said, Well, as soon as they land, there's going to be a big revolution. Everybody's going to rise up and they're going to overthrow Castro. And he said, well, you can't use the U.S. military. And they ended up bringing those guys over. And in the middle of it, in the night, they came to him and said, they're getting wiped out on the beach and you need to send in the military and invade. And he said, we're not going to do it. He stepped out of that meeting and he realized they had been lying to him and trying to trick him. And he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds.
All right, this is a really good interview that he did. I think this was either on Sean Ryan or Joe Rogan. Man, all these guys were so good before they got sworn into the administration, and now they're just all a bunch of failures. Woo! That was hardcore, but it's true, man. It's true. RFK Jr. being one of them. I don't know, man. I've lost so much. I don't know if I'd say hope, but I really loved all the things that RFK Jr. was doing before he actually became head of HHS. And now it's just like, he's just a big nothing burger, in my opinion. Okay, anyway, that was the CIA stuff. Let's listen to the rest of this because this also plays into, the entire military industrial complex stuff that, again, JFK was walking away from. Dude dies and LBJ triples down. Think about that. That's the main one.
For the next 1,000 days of his presidency, he was at war with his military and intelligence apparatus. They tried to get him to go into Laos. He said no. They tried to get him to go into Vietnam. They said that we need 250,000 combat troops. He refused. Everybody around him wanted him to go into Vietnam. He sent 16,000 military advisors. They weren't allowed to fight. Many of them did. They violated the rules of engagement. In October of 1963, he heard some of his Green Berets had been killed over there. And he said, I want a total casualty list from Vietnam. And his aide came to him and said, 75 Americans have died. He said, that's too many. And he signed that day a national security order ordering all troops out of Vietnam, U.S. troops. And then a month later,
Oh, man, it cut off the end. He basically said that a month later he was assassinated. So think about that. So he signs an order to get all troops out of Vietnam. At the time, 75 Americans had died. He gets unalived. And then LBJ, he 10Xs down and ends up costing 58,000 United States lives. Think about that. That's insane. We went from 75 dead in Vietnam to 58,000 by the end, not including the millions of Vietnamese. I think it was a total of 3 million Vietnamese were killed in that process. So anyway, there's like pillar number one between JFK and then LBJ. Pillar number two was in regards to the CIA. And so, wait, what the fuck did I... Oh my God, that's so funny. All right, I left that in there to make you guys laugh. I was literally going through there. I think it's like, I'm taking Benadryl, so I think I'm a little loopy with these antihistamines. But I was going through that. I was like, wait a minute, did I talk about CIA already? I guess Vietnam and the CIA kind of got mixed together. But that is hilarious. That's like me catching myself on a hot mic where I'm like, pillar number two is, wait, what the fuck? Did I already talk about? Yeah. So I did not cut that out. I left that in there for you guys to get a laugh. All right, so really pillar number, I guess let's say disagreement number one was Vietnam. Disagreement number two, let's have the CIA separate. And again, obviously that was because of the way they lied to him about the Bay of Pigs. That was because of the way they wanted to pressure him into staying in Vietnam and doing all that. And I think JFK realized, wait a minute, maybe the CIA is in cahoots with this military industrial complex, which, remember, I'm not going to play the clip, but remember, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the D stands for Dogger. Dwight D. Eisenhower was literally the president before JFK who warned us with that speech about the military-industrial complex. So again, in terms of the CIA, JFK saw the agency as overstepping its mandate, operating as an unaccountable state within a state that meddled in foreign governments, launched covert wars, and undermined U.S. credibility abroad. That is so true. And so again, he wanted to do away with it, where he gets unalived, LBJ comes in, LBJ embraces and expanded the CIA's role, especially in Vietnam. He relied heavily on CIA intelligence for covert operations, psychological warfare, and political manipulation abroad, and in some cases domestically. So under LBJ, the CIA's budget and global footprint grew exponentially and did not shrink. So obviously that's a huge differentiation or different way of handling the CIA. Okay. The third one was the Federal Reserve. And we haven't talked a ton about the Federal Reserve because honestly, it's a little complicated to try to completely break that down and show the nefarious nature of the Federal Reserve. That is something I will try to tackle at some point. But just know that the Federal Reserve and the Fed is probably one of the top 3 roots of all evil in this world. And so JFK's view, in 1963, he issued Executive Order 11110, which authorized the U.S. Treasury to issue silver certificates directly, bypassing the Federal Reserve for certain currency issuance. And remember, the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. It's a privately held corporation or set of corporations. And by the way, I mean, again, I don't know if this is proven, but supposedly it's owned by the Rothschild family, this family that, you've probably heard so many things about. So, okay, so he basically wants to issue silver certificates directly, and then it says, while the scope of the order is debated, it signaled JFK's willingness to challenge the Fed's monopoly over money creation and to keep monetary control closer to the United States Treasury. So again, the biggest takeaway is the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. How wild is that? That's pretty insane. Okay. So this move aligned with JFK's broader suspicion of concentrated, unaccountable financial power. So now think about the combination of the CIA, the military-industrial complex, along with the financial backing of the Federal Reserve, okay? Those guys are all in cahoots together. So now JFK gets unalived. He was heading down a path against the Federal Reserve, against the military-industrial complex, against the CIA. LBJ reversed JFK's silver certificate initiative as soon as he took office. That's pretty wild. He reversed that right away. He supported the Federal Reserve's independence and expanded deficit spending, financing the Vietnam War and Great Society programs through increased borrowing, which further entrenched Fed power. I've got to really define that out for you guys, but basically just know that LBJ, again, propped up the Federal Reserve, just like he propped up the CIA, just like he propped up the military-industrial complex. All right, so the Federal Reserve is the third big pillar. So Vietnam, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and then here are the 2 big ones that are really starting to get talked about a lot more because for a long time, nobody even knew these were taking place. So again, these are just the facts. So I'm not even going to really give an opinion on it. I'm just going to give you the facts. So the Israeli nuclear bomb situation. JFK demanded inspections at Dimona. Dimona was the nuclear facility in Israel and basically demanded that the Israelis stop nuclear proliferation, okay? Dies. LBJ comes in again immediately within his first year, ended those inspections, and he greenlit Israel's nuclear program. So think about that. There's another completely change in direction. JFK saying, hey, you guys need to stop, proliferating. That's a hard word to pronounce. Nuclear weapons. And then LBJ comes in and he looks the other way, basically giving Israel the green light to become a nuclear power. Now, again, this is like the dirty little secret. They don't admit that they have nuclear weapons, but pretty much everybody knows that they do have nuclear weapons. And so that's part of the scuttlebutt with Iran and, they're wanting to get nuclear weapons. I actually think Iran already has nuclear weapons as well. I think this is a little bit shenanigans by both sets of countries, to be honest with you. So anyway, okay. The fourth pillar, or I don't even know which pillar we're on now. Again, this involves foreign agent registration. So JFK was pushing to make the American Zionist Council, which is the precursor to AIPAC. We've talked a little bit about AIPAC. I still need to do that full-on episode about that as well, which I will do. But he basically was pushing to have the American Zionist Council register as a foreign agent, and then homeboy's unalived. LBJ comes in. He completely buries that and absolutely does not require that. And that has extended to this day. And that's a lot of the scuttlebutt that is really out there now. JFK wanted AIPAC's predecessor, which obviously would then mean AIPAC as well, to register as a foreign agent. LBJ buried it. Okay, the next one, I'm just going to touch on it because I'm actually going to be able to bring somebody amazing on. But in 1967, there was an attack on the USS Liberty. Some of you may have heard about this, but the USS Liberty was a U.S. ship that basically was attacked, killing 34 Americans. Now, this didn't have anything to do with JFK because he had already been killed, but basically LBJ suppressed the investigation and silenced all the survivors because it ended up being revealed that Israel was the one that attacked the USS Liberty, and Israel was the one that was basically trying to kind of blame it on Egypt. And this is part of something called the 6-Day War that was taking place in that region. But the bottom line is, it ended up being Israel, who was the United States ally at that time, who attacked the USS Liberty, and then LBJ completely buried it. I'm actually bringing on a guy named Phil Turney. He is one of the survivors of the USS Liberty, and I may have talked about him before, but he's gone on a bunch of podcasts as well, similar to Bart Sibrel. And so anyway, I'll be doing an episode with Phil, and we'll really get into the USS Liberty. And then the last one, again, JFK had already died, so this isn't really LBJ reversing a JFK, I guess, policy, but it's the warfare welfare state. LBJ's Great Society, and that's what it's called. It ballooned domestic spending while feeding the war machine, creating debt and dependency at home while fueling bloodshed abroad. So anyway, those are like 5 or 6 major pillars and really major changes in policy and direction that LBJ did. And had John F. Kennedy not been assassinated, man, I'm not even kidding. Life might be totally different. America might be totally different. This really is unbelievably important and something that, quite frankly, I don't think has gotten enough attention. And that is, who was Lyndon B. Johnson really working for? Because he wasn't serving the interests of America. He just wasn't. All right, I am realizing my voice is like super strained, so I apologize for that. All right, I'm going to cut it here. I hope this was interesting, and more than anything, I hope you understand really the differences in change in policy and direction that quite frankly happened once John F. Kennedy was killed. And so now you have to think to yourself, who killed John F. Kennedy? Who ended up winning out with Lyndon B. Johnson at the helm? I'll tell you who it was not. It was not Lee Harvey Oswald, okay? There's just no way. Now, could he have been part of it? Absolutely. Could he have been a pawn in the mix that played some role? And again, even like a bad guy, I'm not saying I even want to agree with Oswald saying he was the patsy and all that. Yeah, he could have been part of it. But to basically say that it was Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, it's really ludicrous once you understand all of the things we just went through in this episode in terms of, the incredible change of policy and the incredible change of direction. All right, my voice is seriously strained. All right, everybody, call a spade, call your parents. I will try to get another guest interview out for tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be back either Monday or Tuesday. All right, that's it. Man, I was right. When you're feeling healthy, you have a million problems. When you're not feeling 100%, you have one problem. And that's how I feel right now. So anyway, I'm going to get better. All right, call a spade, call your parents.
That was a great way to end it.
This episode was brought to you by Zipix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zip more, smoke less. Totally satisfying, discreet, and delicious. Zipix nicotine-infused toothpicks are available in 6 great flavors, each containing at least 2 milligrams of nicotine to curb those cravings. Zipix is FDA registered and proudly made in the USA. Use discount code DSD for 10% off your order at zipixtoothpicks.com. Zip more, smoke less, save 10%.